On this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, Cisco wants a do-over, privacy in the cloud is all wet, and it's 12 o'clock. Do you know what your employees are doing on your network? Try it on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 27, recorded January 28, 2013. Whoop! There it is. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Lantronix, maker of the Xprint server. Print from your iPad, iPhone, or any iOS device to virtually any printer. For more information, visit xprinterserver.com/twit and enter the coupon code TWIT to receive free shipping on your order. And by GoToMeeting with HD Faces by Citrix, the powerfully simple way to meet and collaborate with colleagues and clients from anywhere. You can share the same screen and see each other face-to-face with HD video conferencing, even from an iPad. Sign up for your 30-day free trial today. Visit GoToMeeting.com, click on the Try It Free button, and use promo code ENTERPRISE. Welcome to Twiet This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balacer, the Digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And I am joined, as always, by a fantastic panel, starting with Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. Curtis, you are somewhere in the boot of Florida. Tell me, how are things down south?
Oh, it's a wonderful winter's day in Florida, which means we're mid-70s and mostly sunny. And, it's just a great day to talk about enterprise technology. But then again, what day isn't?
Oh, yeah, good point, good point. Now, the man who keeps us all honest, I love when we have him on, but I hate when he's actually here, Mr. Oliver Rist. Oliver, tell us where you are right now, and, what are you working on?
Well, let's see. You ask me that every single time, and every single time it's 45 degrees and raining here, except for today, where it's 45 degrees and raining. What am I working on? I'm working on making sense of your show and a bunch of marketing content. I'm sorry, that's all I got for today. Sad.
Well, if you're working on making sense of the show, you'll be working on it for quite a while. Now, before we get into the Enterprise Bite, I do want to I want to take a quick pause to remember the 7 brave astronauts who 27 years ago slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God. Of course, I'm talking about the Challenger crew. I watched them as a child, and they've been an inspiration and a cautionary tale for geeks and engineers the world over. So I remember them, and God bless. Let's get right into the Enterprise Bite. We have one big story today, and that is Cisco exiting the home and small business market. I want to throw this to you first, Curtis. This seems to be the end of a process that was started back when Cisco purchased Flip for $590 million, and then 2 years later, in 2011, shut it down. They've been in the process of exiting the home market. Why is that exactly?
Well, I think that what you get into with Cisco is the question of what their business model is, and especially what their sales channels are. Cisco is a company that's built on the process of selling big technology to businesses. They understand the needs of business. They understand the process of selling business, and I think most important, supporting business very well. The consumer market was always a very interesting fit for them, and to me, the idea of them getting out of the consumer market isn't nearly as surprising as the idea of them getting into the consumer market was just a few short years ago.
Right. So Linksys was purchased by Cisco back in 2003 for about $500 million. We don't know how much it was sold to Belkin for. But, Oliver, that is a good question. Did Cisco get into the home market with both Linksys and with Flip just so they could diversify, or do you think they actually had a business plan behind that?
Well, when they gave me their press tours way back then, they seemed to have a business plan behind it. And I do support the decision. I think they were smart to try it. I think they were not so smart to just let it languish. I didn't see them, they bought Linksys. They had 1 year with a very cool looking amount of hardware that was new. They had some interesting push to, they pretended that they introduced that push Wi-Fi deal. And then they just stopped doing anything exciting with it. And Flip, I don't really lump that into the category of Linksys. Flip is a consumer device. It's not networking. I have no idea why they got into Flip. I was not surprised when they dropped that, but I am a little surprised that they dropped Linksys because the home networking market is still expanding. So I don't see the upside there. I would have thought that would be a nice separate division where they could make some money if they thought about it.
Yeah, I remember a few years back, I also got a press pack from Linksys, and they were saying how they were gaining access to Cisco's supply chain and worldwide sales channel and the infrastructure that they needed to be a service channel provider. But I understood why they were doing it. They were trying to get the whole spectrum of networking. It's interesting that it never really fit. Curtis, I want to go back to you. It almost feels as if it was somewhat sabotage. Oliver brought this up briefly, that we didn't see a lot of innovation. We didn't see a lot of the technology from Cisco's enterprise switches making it down into the home user equipment. Was there lack of synergy? Was there lack of actual interest in joining the markets, or is this just a case of wrong company at the wrong time?
Well, I think what they probably hit, and let me stay here that I don't have any special inside knowledge of what went on with this, but what seems likely is that Cisco envisioned this progression, similar to, if you will, the classic General Motors progression of automobile buyers. General Motors, the idea was you would get people in with Chevrolets at the beginning of their buying patterns, then move them up to something like a Pontiac or an Oldsmobile, finally to a Buick, and then ultimately into a Cadillac. With Cisco, the idea being that if you could attract people to the home and consumer models, then there was some name recognition, some comfort with them when a business grew from a sole proprietorship to a small business and then to an enterprise. It was, I think, a two-pronged idea, one to grow customers and the other to provide enterprises with a logical and comfortable way to put products into very small offices, home offices, remote offices. The problem is that you run into some technology barriers. Let's think about the things that Cisco does so well, and that is create highly managed, highly targeted, highly configurable network devices. Those are qualities that you don't really need down at the consumer level. I mean, I have a fairly advanced home network here, but there's a level of manageability that I just don't need. The overhead, if you will, becomes far more than the functionality of the network will bear. And I think that's what they hit. I also suspect, to be brutally honest, that they ran into an issue with prestige within the organization. If you were going to build a career within Cisco, there was no real prestige for going in and contributing to the Linksys success. Not the way there would be with contributing to the success of the big corporate iron. Put them all together, and it was just a recipe for failure.
I really like that point about brand building and brand recognition. I think that had to have been part of the initial strategy, which is if we put a Linksys/Cisco device in every home, in every computer, and every router, then when these people have to make the big decisions, that they're gonna go with Cisco. They're gonna go with what they know. But that didn't work out so well with Linksys, maybe because it was a matter of prestige. Maybe it was just something that people didn't want to see the high-end Cisco technologies make their way into. But Oliver, let me ask you this. I'll give you the last word here. This can't be it, right? I mean, Cisco at some point is going to have to fire another bet into the pot. They're going to have to try this again, or they're just going to have to put up with being only an enterprise network equipment manufacturer. What's your read on that?
You said Linksys. You meant Cisco?
Right.
Or did I hear? Okay, yeah, Cisco. No, I mean, this I think is plain as day. They want to stick to enterprise, which is fine. But I agree with most people, even in that airspace, they're not innovating. They're sticking to the middle of the road. So unless they do something sexy, I see them, gradually declining, right? So that'd be my prediction for Cisco at this point.
You heard it here, folks. Cisco, gradually declining since 2013. Now, what we're talking about in this story is the idea of brand recognition, the idea of taking home technologies that the end user is used to, and then bringing them into the enterprise, hopefully. And this is a perfect time for me to talk about one of our sponsors, Lantronix. Now, we all know that printing from an iOS device can be a challenge. There are very few AirPrint printers out there, and whether at the home or at the office, it's difficult to get something off your iPhone, off your iPod Touch, off your iPad, and into paper form. Now, there are a few kludges. You could email it to yourself. You could cut and paste it into a document that you then share over something like Google Drive. Or you could try something like this, the Lantronix Xprint Server. The Xprint Server enables wireless printing from your iPad, from your iPhone, from your iPod Touch, almost effortlessly. It eliminates the need to print through apps. You just plug this device in. It will automatically find all the printers on your network and share them with your compatible iOS device. Now, the cool thing about this is that it works with almost 4,000 printers currently on the market, including some multi-function printers. Setup is easy. It plugs in, it discovers the available printers, and makes them usable by your iOS device without any app download. Now, for the more advanced, it also includes the ability to customize the way that you access the device, which means that it goes from easy setup to advanced setup. It's something that, IT engineers and professionals will appreciate. A single Xprint server supports multiple printers and virtually unlimited iOS devices. The Home Edition is $99 and supports up to 8 USB and 2 network printers, while the Office Edition is $199 and supports an unlimited number of network printers and includes features like Active Directory support. That's one of the things that engineers have most wanted out of the original Xprint server products. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to visit xprintserver.com/twit for more information and to buy. And we've got a special offer. Use our promo code TWIT to receive free shipping on your order. Remember, visit xprintserver.com/twit and at checkout, enter the coupon code TWIT. And we thank Lantronix for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's get to the meat of the episode, and we've brought in a super special guest, legal star of Twill This Week in Law on the TWIT Network, Mr. Evan Brown. Mr. Brown, thank you very much for coming on Twiet.
Padre, it's awesome to be here. What an honor. Really have been amped to come on your show to talk with you and Oliver and Curtis here. Lots of interesting things that you've given us to think about. So I'm here to have a good time.
And a good time will be had by all. The reason why we have you on, of course, is because we have had many stories over the past 26 episodes that have intersected enterprise technology and law. And we wanted an actual lawyer, a lawyer who was, well, let's just say involved with law in technology, to come on and set the record straight about a couple of issues that we've been having. The first one has to be the whole idea of privacy in the cloud. Now, let me set the backstory on you. We had a story a while back about the South Carolina Supreme Court making a ruling that email was not protected under the Stored Communication Act, at least in certain circumstances. What they argued was that the 1986 SCA, the Stored Communications Act, did not apply if email had been abandoned. And the way that they defined abandoned was to say, if you read the email and then left it on the server, it meant that you didn't want it anymore. And if you didn't want it anymore, it was no longer protected. It could be looked at without a warrant. And in the case that South Carolina looked at, it meant that a suspicious wife was not able to be prosecuted for looking at her husband's emails, which exposed his infidelity. So we went from that case to a case involving, the U.S. government trying to cover their butt in the mega upload case. And in that case, the United States government basically said they were perfectly justified in seizing user data because they didn't seize user data. What they seized were servers on which the user data resided. It was sort of just a way to kludge their way around needing to find a warrant. Well, that's where we are. We are now looking at the destruction of privacy in the cloud, where we've got two major decisions that are essentially turning back the clock on what is and isn't ours. Evan, I want to open it up to you first. What's your read on the South Carolina Supreme Court decision and on the DOJ justification of their seizure of mega upload servers?
Well, what a great issue to talk about. And I guess I would start by picking up on a couple of the observations you made, Padre. You're seeing that turning back the clock on privacy. I would suggest we think about it a little bit differently when we're thinking about privacy in the cloud, and recognizing that we probably never had much privacy in the cloud to begin with. The Stored Communications Act, which is what is at issue here in the South Carolina case, and then if we look at the Department of Justice's arguments in the mega upload case, these are both situations where they're trying to apply a legal framework that just doesn't match the modern technological context. I think you mentioned it, Padre, and the Stored Communications Act is from 1986, which is eons ago in terms of how electronic communications technology has developed and advanced. And one of the main cases in the Department of Justice brief in the mega upload case, that one of the cases that the Department of Justice cited to was all the way back in 1923 to try to draw this distinction between ownership of the thing used to provide the services, the server itself, and the data that are stored on that server. So it's at best a very anachronistic kind of analysis that we are constrained to make in situations like this, because the laws that are on the books and the legal frameworks that arise from those laws just don't, they just make it a round hole that we're trying to put a square peg in, or whatever it is. It's difficult to match the facts as we have them today because of the technologies we enjoy to the frameworks that are just decades old and way out of date. So it's tough, and it points to areas where the law needs to be updated and needs to be changed.
Now, Curtis, I want to throw this to you, because this is an argument that I've heard before, that the law just hasn't caught up, that they're trying to use an old framework for a new digital world, which doesn't really lend itself to the old framework. And I get that, and I understand that, and law does take time to catch up. But what worries me is I'm not seeing a lot of motion in, here in DC or anywhere else, to be frank, that is looking at creating new laws that are specifically targeted at digital rights, at cloud storage, at privacy in a digital age.
Well, I think you're right in both things that you just said. Number one, they are, in fact, trying to apply laws made for different circumstances to this. Now, there's nothing new in this. I'm sure that Evan would tell you that that's sort of how we develop laws. We start out trying to apply laws for existing systems to new ones, and then gradually we develop new laws and new frameworks for new technologies. The problem is, as you point out, no one really cares about this except for the corporate legal departments and some rights activists. In Washington, I think to say that they have bigger fish to fry is to understate the situation. Corporate and electronic privacy, I don't think, is even at the top of the cyber law list. I think that you would probably have a lot of people who spent more time on cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, things like that, than would give attention to this privacy. And we're in a particular environment where there is a lot of suspicion anytime someone says that they are deserving of greater privacy. For better or for worse, for the last probably dozen years or so at least, We've been in an environment where the notion has been that if you're not doing anything wrong, you really shouldn't worry about the government poking into your stuff. Now, I don't think you have to be a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda to worry about government overreach. We've had a recent case that's brought this back into public spotlight. But the fact is that from a business perspective, this is huge. And from an international business perspective, this is keeping a lot of companies from allowing their data to be put on any system that might conceivably fall under U.S. jurisdiction. Within the next 18 months to 2 years, I think we're going to see a lot of business decisions made on this, and I believe it's really going to start affecting a lot of U.S. businesses, at which point, with any luck at all, we'll start to see it getting a little bit of traction in Washington as the lobbyists weigh in.
Right. Curtis, I want to throw this to you because you can give us the honest say on this. If we really start to think of privacy on the cloud as non-existent, and if enterprise can no longer be sure that something they put in, not just one of their servers, but let's say in a Dropbox or in a Carbonite backup, what does that do to this burgeoning cloud services market, which, you know, we're talking about $1 trillion market here? Can you continue to offer those kinds of services? Would the growth rate continue if people think that anything they put into the cloud is fair game for any sort of law enforcement agency?
Padre, you tossed back to me. Did you mean for that to go to Evan?
I'm sorry. No, I meant that to go to Oliver. Sorry.
Oliver.
See, this time I was sorry. What does it do to the cloud market? Well, it's going to hurt it, and not just because of the government issue, right? I mean, having come from the evil empire, I happen to know Windows Server's marketing message, right? Multi-tenancy, totally separate accounts in the cloud. You can store your data on the same server. Nobody can see it, and we're all nerds, so we know there is no 100% there, right? Doesn't exist. So I don't see this cloud utopia that we're talking about actually coming to bear. I think a lot of businesses are going to try it and then walk away. I think it might give rise to some new businesses. I think maybe some new business models, places out of the U.S. Jurisdiction, perhaps, that could store, private data, encrypted, and that's not legally touchable by the U.S. government. I could see that. Actually, I had a question for Evan, but we can ask that later.
Well, actually, that's a really good segue into the next part of this segment, and that is, well, it's a fascinating story about Google. So Google has, they've publicly stated that they will not give in to warrantless requests for data. They came out and they said that Google is now demanding probable cause and court-issued warrants before they turn over any Gmail or cloud-stored documents. Now, this runs counter to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which allows the government to access consumer data without a warrant if it's stored for more than 180 days on Google's server. So here we have a private business, a big one at that, but a private one nonetheless, that is basically saying, no, we will not give you our customer data unless you give us something from a court, from an authority that says that you have a right to this data. This seems like a showdown in the making. Evan, what's your take on this?
Well, it does sound like a showdown, and probably to a greater extent, this is something that Google is saying to make itself look good. Just in the past few weeks, there's been some news coming from Google that talks about, and this is all part of its promise to be more transparent about how much information it is asked by the government and by private parties to turn over. So recently there's been some news that the requests from the government to turn over information, those numbers have been increasing, and we also see an increasing number of DMCA takedown notices that Google has to deal with. So what we see here is a statement by Google, I think, to make it look like it's really doing something in the interest of privacy of the user, whether that be the consumer end user or even the enterprise user of Google services. Because the Stored Communications Act, as you pointed out, Padre, it does require a warrant from the government if it's going to turn over messages that are less than 180 days old. And there are some nuances to all of this stuff. But the presumption, at least in the 1986 mindset, was that if it hadn't been looked at already and it's still kind of new, that the messages haven't been abandoned and that they're entitled to a greater amount of privacy. So for all of these older messages greater than 180 days, the Stored Communications Act provides lesser of a privacy protection than those newer messages. And so what the law actually says is that the government doesn't need a warrant to get those, but it would still, the government can't still just call up Larry and Serge and just say, to hand me, John Smith's email account. They still either have to get an administrative subpoena, like, the FTC commonly issues administrative subpoenas, or it has to get a court order under what they call 2703D order, which is what was at issue in the Harris case when the government was investigating that one Occupy protester in New York City. It's a court order, which is different than a warrant, to get information like this. So I'm not really sure what Google's plan is if push would be, or what its plan would be if push came to shove here, because the government still could use one of those administrative subpoenas or get that 2703D order, which in a failure on Google's part to abide by those would get it in trouble, contempt of court, sanctions, and all that other stuff. So I think we need to be careful and moderated in how much credence we're giving Google in saying this. Sure, it wants to take a pro-privacy standpoint on all this, but I bet you anything, if push came to shove and it were ordered by a federal court to pay some heavy sanctions for failure to comply with an administrative subpoena or another form of court order, it would probably end up turning over the information in the end rather than face those penalties.
Yeah, that's exactly the question I had for you, because it sounds great. I mean, I love the fact that Google came out and said, no, you can't have this data. If you want this data, you have to be legal. But according to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, it would be legal if that data was there for more than 180 days, right? I think that's an act that still a lot of people haven't heard of. They don't know about. They don't know that's in play. That's if they have their data on someone else's server, so in the cloud, on a Gmail server, or in a Google Drive, in a Dropbox, for longer than 6 months, the government doesn't need a warrant to access it, right?
Right. Well, it still needs to go through some other pathway to get that information. Like I said, the U.S. Attorney's Office can't just call up Google and say, "Hey, turn that over." They still need to get that subpoena or that court order. So there is still some protection in place, even if it's after 180 days. So it's pretty easy to overstate the fears that people have, with that 180-day timeline. But let's back up just a second. I mean, it all goes to show how anachronistic is the word I used earlier in our conversation. These are old laws set up for old frameworks that do not mesh with the way technology is used today. And it also brings to light one of the issues in that South Carolina court case that we were talking about, which is actually a slightly different issue than the 180-day cutoff here. What was at issue in that South Carolina case with the jealous wife's daughter-in-law, actually was the one accused of doing the hacking, is the question, and let me just frame the issue briefly, and it kind of highlights how absurd the analysis really has to be. The fundamental issue in the case was whether or not messages in the guy's Yahoo email account that he had looked at and had archived to put away or whatever, whether those were in electronic storage. And for those who are watching, they'll see me using the air quotes, whether those are in electronic storage as defined under the Stored Communications Act. And even though they were stored on a server somewhere away from the user, in the cloud, they were not, the court found that they were not in electronic storage. And therefore, they weren't subject to the privacy protections that the Stored Communication Act affords. So isn't that crazy that the law has to be, that the analysis has to be so twisted to come to a conclusion that stuff that's in electronic storage on the server is not in electronic storage? It's just crazy.
Curtis, I want to go back to you. There doesn't seem to be a great understanding of what privacy laws are. I like this last example that Evan brings up, where there's actually two different laws we're talking about. There's the 1986 Stored Communications Act, and then there's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And they deal with the same subject matter, but they have very different applications and very different consequences. Have enterprise professionals put the time in that they need to actually understand the ramifications, or is it just sort of we hope for the best? Is that where we are in the state of the industry?
Well, I think this is one of those classic cases, and we see it a little bit more and more often, where we have two fields of tremendous specialization coming together. Because while we often complain in the IT industry that judges, juries, and lawyers don't understand technology, the fact is that it's no more reasonable to expect an IT department to understand the nuances of multiple laws that could come into play than it is to expect a judge to understand all the ramifications of the cloud computing infrastructure. This is a case where each side has to depend on the other. And for the enterprise, it's where your enterprise legal department or your corporate counsel earn their money. This is one where I would say that enterprise legal departments need to have someone who is coming up to speed very rapidly on all this. I will also say that I think it's great that Google has sort of stepped into the fore. One of our chat forum members pointed out that Google, of all the companies out there, does probably have a non-trivial legal staff and budget. If this were Kurt's super cool cloud email and pachinko parlor that was being attacked, I doubt that there would be the wherewithal to seriously challenge what the government is doing. Google does deserve, for whatever their true motives might be, some credit for going to bat for all the privacy folks out there.
I would totally go to your pachinko parlor, just so you know. Yeah. Actually, okay, Oliver, I've got the right name this time. I want to throw this to you and take a slightly different slant on this. There's a lot of talk about privacy. There's a lot of fretting about privacy, especially in the cloud. Is this all just useless hand-wringing? Because if you're putting it up in the cloud, you're already passing through multiple systems, multiple networks, at which at any point someone could read your data. Someone could look at what you've got. I mean, is this really just sort of worrying for the sake of worrying?
That was my point during the last segment, right? I mean, you can worry about the government, but in fact, nothing's safe up there, right? I mean, look at WikiLeaks; it doesn't matter. But I'm going to skip your question and ask my question to Evan, because I'm really interested.
I like that.
I'm really interested. So you made a point that we're hampered by the fact that new laws or existing laws are shaped on old systems. But if I go back to whatever it is, 1923, if I take a paper envelope and I stick it in a drawer and I lock it, and somebody fakes a key or picks the lock, isn't a password a key? I mean, at that basic level, can't the law move forward to this day and age where I say, hey, if I lock something, then it's mine, and you have to go through regular legal channels to get in there? What's the rationale for saying, oh, well, you left it in the drawer for more than 6 weeks, so now it's ours?
Right. Well, there's a number of really interesting concepts that are kind of embedded in that question, and I think probably at the top level, one of the big distinctions we would need to make in the analysis to kind of fit it into the hypothetical you're presenting there is the distinction between the legal rights and obligations that parties have, the enterprises have, when it comes to privacy and information security, data private and information security, the protecting it, the information and the data from access by just anyone, civilians, if you will. And then there's the more academic kind of constitutional concern about, under the Fourth Amendment, about whether the government's going to come up and be all up in our business on this stuff. So with the taking it back to your hypothetical, putting the letter in the drawer, clearly there are plenty of brick and mortar, analog world ways that we can evaluate what the legal rights and obligations are there from a data privacy information. It's trespassing to come into somebody's office and unlock their door, unlock the drawer, whether they have a key or whether it's a counterfeit key or whatever. The same would hold true for the government, whether the government can come in and search your desk drawer. In fact, that goes straight to the heart of the language that's in the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution. The word privacy is not in the Fourth Amendment, but it talks about security in our persons and our effects and our papers. You got to love that 18th century kind of approach to describing that. But the way it really, I think, gets different when we talk about data in the cloud is that the courts, and this started in the 1980s, began to recognize that there was no Fourth Amendment interest in privacy. And again, the Fourth Amendment doesn't use the word privacy, but it talks about security in our effects, in our papers, in our stuff. The courts started holding that once you put information with a third party, you no longer enjoy the same kind of Fourth Amendment right to the security in that than what you would if it were locked in your desk drawer, so to speak. The first case that came up that really articulated this well was a case, I believe it's called Miller, and it had to do with receipts and information that the bank was holding, and there was no Fourth Amendment interest in information that you had turned over to the bank. So the courts are, in a certain extent, stuck with that sort of analysis that has come into play and kind of there's been a framework built around it for the last 30 some odd years. We see signs of that starting to erode. The courts seeing that technology is new and that the information in the cloud and that the vast amounts of information collection and big data and the evaluation and analysis that can be done with the technologies we have today should cause some change. I mean, just as recently as last January, about a year or so ago, the Supreme Court decided the case of U.S. versus Jones, and that was the one where whether it was a Fourth Amendment violation to put the GPS on the guy's car. And in the concurring opinions, the court talked about how, wow, this is just a strange new world that we're living in. We've got to really be thinking about how to treat privacy and security in ways in which the technology is developing. So, Oliver, I have no idea if I really got to your question, but certainly there were a number of different issues that were implicit that kind of go out from the scenario that you were raising, the tension that you were talking about there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at that a little closer. I mean, I could draw another analogy saying I could stick my letter in a safety deposit box or put it in public storage, right? I mean, that's storing it with a third party. I know I'm oversimplifying, but we could go back and forth on that all day long. I'm just
sure, yeah, and I think that, I mean, if we look at the concerns of the enterprise, we need to look no further than just how the market has actually played out. I mean, if you're putting it with the bank in a lockbox. I don't want to sound too much like Al Gore, put Social Security in the lockbox, or deal with your data storage company, Iron Mountain, whomever. You've got those contractual relationships there to govern the security and the privacy of those things, and the government is busy fighting the war on drugs and the war on terror and Aaron Swartz. So for most people, it's not going to be a concern of whether the government's going to come looking for access to legitimate business information for folks who, for the most part, are just minding their own business. Now, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be concerned about Big Brother, but I think our brain cycles are probably better spent worrying that information security and data privacy regimes and systems and practices and norms are put in place well. And that's how the enterprise really should expend its resources and for what it should be paying its legal teams to spend the most time on.
Concur.
I'm very happy that you guys are bringing this point up about the idea of the analogy to a key, because the very last story in this segment of the show is talking about Kim.com's new mega service. Now, they're claiming legal invincibility here, invulnerability, because there is end-to-end encryption. The user has the key, and that's it. Mega has no ability to actually look at the data that's being put up on their servers. So they're claiming that this should make them bulletproof. Since they have no access to the data, they can't be held accountable for the data. It's really in the hands of the users. As NOP90 mentioned in the chat room, this looks like PGP. This is pretty good protection for the new age, where me and only the people that I give my keys to have access to the data that I upload onto the internet. Evan, I want to throw this to you. If a company like Mega really did not have access to the data, can't unlock the drawer, as it were, does it make them legally isolated?
Well, I mean, we all know that the government is upset with Mega Upload, Kim.com, and may likely be upset with Mega over copyright. That's what at issue here. And in general, the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, shields intermediaries like Mega from the liability for the infringement occasioned by its users. You upload something infringing to a platform, and if the content owner identifies that and says, platform, take it down, so long as the platform has jumped through a few hoops to sail its ship into the safe harbor and then does certain things, namely disable access or take it down, you can't come after the provider for that infringement. That's been YouTube's big defense in the Viacom lawsuit. So, I mean, the courts have interpreted the DMCA to be to give really broad protection when it comes to all of this. There are a couple of weaknesses in the wall that the DMCA may be there to shield Mega for there. The first would be from the Grokster decision from 2005, and that was where the Supreme Court held that the file sharing service Grokster could be liable for what its users had done because it actually went out and marketed its service as a place to say, hey, come use our service and infringe copyright. So to the extent that copyright plaintiffs or the government could show that Mega has just been set up with the object of promoting infringement, then that protection from secondary liability would start to erode away. The other one comes from maybe a little bit more nuanced doctrine in copyright law in the cases that talk about the DMCA that says that these providers, they don't have an obligation. YouTube doesn't have an obligation to go out and screen every bit of the whatever 72 hours of video that are uploaded to its servers every minute. That would require an army of 1 million lawyers to actually do that. The providers don't have an affirmative duty to actually do that, but they can't be willfully blind to certain red flag indicators. And so this is the point where it sounds like Mega is trying to put itself in a situation where on one hand it's saying, well, what we don't know can't hurt us. But at the same time, if they go too far on that and ignore other red flag indicators that there is infringing content there, they would run the risk of being willfully blind and losing that DMCA protection. Honestly, if I were them, I would be much more worried about policing their systems for content that violates the law for reasons other than copyright, like child pornography or other illegal content. There's just a small subset of content that is just on its face illegal, but there could be some really toxic stuff that people are putting through the system, and Mega would really not be a responsible citizen if it doesn't do at least something to make sure that those most toxic, most harmful forms of content aren't being kept from its system. So there's a point where there's a dark side to the underbelly, which might be a way to describe a service by Kim.com.
Well, actually, Evan, I want to ask you about that, because what Kim.com is claiming here is that if it's end-to-end encryption, they can't look at any of the material being uploaded to their servers. They don't actually have that ability. They can't crack the encryption code on every bit of information that comes into their network. So if that's the case, does that really take them out? I mean, it's not safe harbor if they don't know, if they have no access to the material. It would be like people uploading videos to YouTube, but the video could only be seen by one other person who actually has the encryption keys for that video. Right. Does that absolve them of the legal responsibility?
Perhaps. I mean, who knows? I mean, if they were, let's just take the easy example of child pornography. There's no question it's unlawful. There's essentially no exception for liability if someone is found in possession of child pornography. For a moment, the child pornography, at least, or for, I don't know how exactly the architecture is going to be set up, but Mega could be in possession of child pornography. But there is an intent element that's required for the prosecutor to be successful in prosecuting someone for the possession of this stuff. The person has to know that it's in possession of it. And so that's the point where it would, you said it, Padre. If they don't know and they don't have the access to it, well, then how possibly can they know that they're in possession of it? So it's very difficult to sit here and do the analysis and really point to a way in which they could be liable for that. The larger question is a normative question, and it causes us to think of how we want to, govern ourselves as members of a responsible and civilized global society. Should we support platforms that do try to be so, I'll just borrow the term from the DMCA nomenclature, who try to be so willfully blind as to the content that's going through their platform, knowing that there could be a risk to people from its use, but they choose to not do anything about it. It's a question that's very difficult to evaluate.
I want to throw this over to Curtis and to Oliver really quickly, because we're totally out of time for this, but it's a fascinating discussion. And that is, what we're talking about here is the trust no one mentality. Steve Gibson talks about it all the time on Security Now, also on the Twit network. And it's this mentality that I just have to assume that every bit of information I put on the internet is going to be viewable by somebody else. Now, if I make it viewable but not understandable, that's the policy that I should be adopting for everything I put into the cloud. Would you agree that that's something that enterprise has to learn, that every bit of email needs to be encrypted, that every document that goes up, no matter how important, needs to have some sort of PGP or other encryption on it, so that everything that goes up is, well, even if it gets compromised, is still safe?
Padre, I'll say that it's not just stuff that's going up on the internet. I know of a number of security officials who say that the only safe thing is to assume that your firewall, your basic enterprise network, is compromised, is going to be compromised, and there's nothing you can do about it. Therefore, the best security strategy is one that minimizes damage, and that's where the encryption comes in. So I think that we have a growing move to encrypt essentially everything on the assumption that there are no files that you can consider truly secure if there is any way that they are connected to the internet directly or indirectly. So as Cheebert would say, an air gap is the only way to ensure security. Absent that, encryption is the way to go.
And Oliver, what about you? Do you trust no one?
No one. I'm completely on the side of don't trust anyone. Everything I have on my Dropbox account is zipped. I'm probably going to upgrade that to something else soon. I think enterprises have to learn this if they're going to use the cloud. I built a taxi for a credit card system once for a taxi service, and the one they were using, they were actually transmitting credit card numbers in clear text. So, we gave them a long educational speech, and they decided to upgrade, which was a good idea. I think a lot of businesses still have a lot to learn. There's a lot of really weak assumptions being made, and trust no one. And I really don't even trust anyone on my local box either.
Yeah. Well, that's a topic for another show, but I'd love to talk to you about that at some point, because even in today's age where we kind of understand privacy and security, I'm constantly surprised by how many people still transmit sensitive data in clear text. But again, that's a discussion for another show. A great show, by the way. Before we move on, I do want Cranky Hippo to throw up the lower third here for our bit of homework. It's been a while since we've had homework. In fact, I think it's been since episode 1 since we had homework. So for our audio listeners, I need you to go to http://m.thetechstop, THETCHSTOP.net/AUP. That's acceptable use policy. .pdf. Download that file right now. This is going to be the framework for the discussion in the third part of the show, where we're going to go over a boilerplate acceptable use policy and just show the things you should and should not do, that you can and cannot ask. It's going to be a fantastic, fun-filled journey had by all. Speaking of a fun-filled journey had by all, I want to take another moment to mention another one of our sponsors, and that's Citrix with GoToMeeting with HD Faces. Now, it is winter, and I like winter. I like winter because I tend to have a winter build. I stay warm, and I like it much more than summer. But, it doesn't just mean skiing, hot chocolate, and warm nights bundles up in front of a fire. Winter also means an absolute mess for the way that we do business. Roads get closed, people call in sick, flights get canceled. Now, you could curse the weather, you could brave the elements, you could put yourself in personal danger to travel in the middle of whatever Stormageddon is currently threatening your part of the world, or you could try GoToMeeting by Citrix, the fast and simple way to meet with clients and coworkers online, no matter what the weather is like. With GoToMeeting, it's easy to stay connected from wherever you are, no matter how the weather outside is frightful. You just click a link, you turn on your webcam, and you're instantly connected to your team. You can join a meeting from anywhere using your computer, smartphone, or tablet, and Citrix has even made it possible to present a meeting from your iPad. That means you can keep in touch and stay productive even when you can't make it into the office. Now, you may have noticed that I am particularly passionate about GoToMeeting with HD Faces, and that's because I'm not just a spokesman for Citrix, I'm one of its biggest customers. I use GoToMeeting on an almost daily basis for work and for podcasting. Now, right here, what you're seeing on screen is a typical meeting that I would have. I've got a meeting of 5 people in 5 different parts of the United States. And, we're allowing ourselves to see one another, to see our facial expressions, to hear the little things that matter when you're having a face-to-face meeting. My work has me meeting with literally hundreds of coworkers and colleagues each month. Now, I used to jump in a plane every time I had a meeting because that was the accepted way of getting face-to-face time. But I switched to GoToMeeting with HD Faces, and I haven't looked back. Not only has it saved my organization money, but it saved me time, wear and tear, and possibly saved my sanity. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to visit GoToMeeting and try it free for 30 days. Don't wait. For this special offer, visit GoToMeeting.com, click on the Try It Free button, and use the promo code ENTERPRISE. Remember to use the promo code ENTERPRISE. GoToMeeting, meeting is believing. And we thank Citrix for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get into the home stretch here. Actually, this should be a segment that every enterprise professional out there should pay attention to because we're talking about AUP. No, not the Austrian Universal Party. We're talking about acceptable use policies. This is the document that you pass around to all your employees to let them know what they can and cannot do on your corporate network. Now, we gave you the link earlier in the show for the bit of homework. That is a typical piece of boilerplate AUP that we've used in the church. I want to toss it over to Evan. Evan, what would you say is the number one mistake that people make when they're designing an AUP for their business?
Well, it's hard to isolate one mistake, but there are at least 3 pretty big important issues in this. And from the enterprise perspective, clearly the enterprise, most reasonable enterprises are going to want to be able to exert as much control over the system as reasonably possible for all kinds of good reasons. The biggest ones, touching on issues what we've talked about already, information security and data privacy, both, for protection of trade secrets and also avoiding liability, let's say under the PCI DSS or something like that. So one of the most important things to accomplish is to draft a policy in a way where it's truly going to be enforceable, and at the same time make it useful in as much as it communicates to the employees or the various users of the system what those users' expectations should be when it comes to privacy, for example, what types of content is appropriate to put over the system. And then for each one of those issues, there are corresponding concerns and interests and assumptions that the end users make that are oftentimes erroneous when it comes to what kind of privacy they may have or what kind of recourse they have for their speech being, having them being asked to be quiet on certain topics. So those are like some of the bigger issues that that arise in policies like this, agreements like this.
Curtis, let me throw this to you because, of course, you've had to deal with AUPs in the past, right? Pretty much any business that you've ever signed on with. What is your impression of that document when they hand it to you in your employee packet and you have to sign it and give it back to HR? Is it something you actually look at? Is it something you just sign and toss away thinking it will never affect you? Or is it something that you actually go through and use it as one of the basis of deciding whether or not you want to work for that organization?
I tend to look at AUPs, and the reason is because of the way I earn my living. One of the things that I have noted in many organizations is that they tend to want to lay claim to everything you do on any computing device, anywhere, for any reason, at any time, ever. And there are a lot of people who sign that away, and I'll admit, for some people, it's probably not a big deal. But I can recall walking into an HR office and putting the AUP down on their desk and saying, "Are you really telling me that if I write a letter to the editor of my local paper about the policy of enforcing dog poo ordinances, that you're claiming ownership of that?" And there was a stammering, well, no. I said, well, here in the AUP, it says that if I use a computing device while I'm in your employ, not your device on your time, but while I'm in your employ, then you claim ownership. And so generally, we go through and we sit down and we redline parts of the agreement. I will, in fact, decline to sign agreements that I don't feel I can live with. I'm a crotchety old fart that way. A lot of people never read them in the same way that people just click on, I agree to all of the policies that come along with software or online services. I do read them because this is a contract that you're signing. And, contracts tend to be enforceable, and they have a strange way of being enforceable to the benefit of those who have the better paid legal team.
Oliver, I want to go to you here. Let's say you have this AUP in front of you, and this AUP actually has some interesting provisions, one of which is they have the ability to search any device that has touched their network. And, for obvious reasons, they may feel the need to look to see if you've copied any information, if you've accessed the system at any given time, if you have disseminated confidential information. Would this be something that would be a deal breaker for you? If they said, look, if you're going to work for us, we have the ability at any time to take your iPad, your phone, your computer that you've bought and brought into the office and do a complete search?
Well, let me answer that in multiple parts. Number one, I would call BS on Curtis. If you're telling me that you download the Apple licensing agreement and read all 400 pages of that, I call BS on you. There's no way that you did that. I will also agree. I am a crotchety old fart as well, and unlike Curtis, I'll just sign something like this. I'm happy to just get the job. I don't want to argue with anyone. If I was going to look at this and I see a whole bunch of stuff in here where I'd just be scratching my head, I will go to a guy like Evan and say, yeah, I know that they wrote it down, but could I fight that in court? And I got a funny feeling I could get through most of this if it actually came to trial or even just a negotiation, but I'll cook that off. So I would probably sign this anyway with a bunch of, shakes of my head and smirks at whoever was giving it to me. But if my lawyer said, no, they have total access to it, this is completely enforceable the way that it's written, no, I don't think I would sign it.
Yeah, Padre, I'm so glad you asked that. And Oliver, I'm glad you answered it in the way that you did, because, again, there are a couple of issues that are, if you've noticed, when we talk about legal things, it's very hard to just give bright line answers, but all we do is kind of like identify issues. But what your question is getting at, Padre, is the real pressing issue for in this space for the enterprise these days, and the lawyers who help enterprises with this. And this is the question of BYOD and managing the risks and the management of the various legal relationships and rights and obligations that you have when you're allowing employees to use their own mobile devices or their own laptop or something like that. And so there's this big tension between the interest of the enterprise in maintaining the proprietary nature of the information that is that the employee for which which the employee enjoys the privilege of being able to work on his or her own device with, and the sense of autonomy and the sense of privacy that the employee should also enjoy just as much in the photos. And so, should the employer be able to go in and search? Should the employer be able to remotely wipe the drive of that mobile device? These are all really tricky questions, and it's one that's difficult to really get everybody's understanding in place. I guess the other point would be going to Curtis's assertion that certain employers would claim ownership in everything that is used writing on that device. Yeah, it may say that, but practically, is the employer, is the enterprise really going to do that? I would also make the observation that at least a number of states, I know Illinois here, I'm in Chicago and I practice here in Illinois, has a statute called the Illinois Employee Patent Act, which actually makes void certain provisions in agreements like this AUP that would cause there to be an assignment of patent rights developed using the computer system, even for that, if other factors were met, like if it was totally unrelated to the job. If to go back to Curtis's letter, if say instead of it being a letter to the editor about dog sanitation regulations, but it was instead writing some code that actually turned out to be patentable. We'll set aside the issues of software patents, and it had nothing to do with the operations of the company, but the law would step in to protect the company from being so grabby in those instances. So that's one point that the enterprise should be aware of in drafting these things, is to not make them so overly broad that portions of them are going to be ruled unenforceable in any event.
Right. And Evan, actually, I want to bring to you a phrase: reasonable expectation of privacy. This is one of those things that when we're talking about your rights and your rights to privacy, it's a readily recognizable legal term where, for example, in your home, you have a great reasonable expectation of privacy. Whereas if you're walking down the street and someone takes a picture of you, that's perfectly legal, because out in public, you really have a very low reasonable expectation of privacy. How do you use an AUP to set what the expectations are for privacy? I mean, can you say legally and then defend it, while you're working for us, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy?
The way that usually, yes, and I'll go back on what I said earlier. Yeah, there are bright line answers sometimes. And where this has come up several times in the last 5-6 years in litigation, is actually it's the employee who's claiming that certain communications he or she made through using his or her work computer should be kept private, when the employee has gotten involved with litigation against the company. Here's what happened. There was a case called Scott versus Beth Israel. I think it was from 2007. The guy was he ended up in litigation with his former employer over some employment issue. The employer used some of the emails that the guy had sent to his lawyer about the case. So these were the emails that were protected by the attorney-client privilege, or should have been protected by the attorney-client privilege. But the court found that, among other things, the workplace email policy created in the employee, the former employee, this notion that he did not enjoy any reasonable expectation of privacy in those communications. And so those emails were not protected by the attorney-client privilege. So there's a situation where actually the rubber hit the road, and there was actually a determination by a court that the employee did not enjoy that expectation. The moral of the story, the thing to be taken from that, is if you're in a dispute, especially if you're in a dispute with your employer, or even if you're in a dispute with anyone else, and you need to be talking to your lawyer, at least use your Gmail account, and at best use a different device, one that can't, arguably be brought within these policies, because the real risk to you in that situation is losing the protection of the privilege that you have of confidentiality when you're communicating with your legal counsel. So there's a real practical tip for all of y'all out there.
Microsoft's not going to like that.
Yeah, actually, Lou MM makes a very interesting comment. He's one of our contributors. He's in the chat realm. He's awesome. He works for Microsoft, and he mentioned that when he first started working for Microsoft, they had an AUP that basically said anything he does, Microsoft owns. Now, they've loosened that AUP to now say, well, if you're using your own personal resources, of course, we allow moonlighting. But Microsoft does have some pretty restrictive AUPs. Oliver, I know you have experience with that, so I want to ask you this question. As an employee, what are the things that you're looking for in an AUP that send up, red flags?
What are the things that I'm looking for in an AUP that send up red flags? Well, the one you gave me sends up a bunch of red flags where it's vague language, right? You're telling me too much storage. I don't know what that means. You're telling me if I transmit certain types of data, you don't really define what that is. If I introduce a virus, what do you mean? Like, if I get infected and it happens to go to the rest of the company, I can get fired for that kind of thing, no matter where I got it from. If they're going to tell me that they're really going to try to enforce stuff like this, then I'm going to read it with a really critical eye, and I'm going to hand it, back with a whole bunch of red lines. And if they tell me no, we're definitely going to enforce that, then I got to be a crotchety old fart like Curtis and say no.
Okay, Curtis, actually, let me ask you that. What are the things that you look for that send up red flags that say, I have to ask about this? This is not something I can sign my name to until I clear up this vague language or this particular provision? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Oh, am I back now?
You're back. You're back.
Oh, wonderful. I'll start by agreeing with Oliver that vague language is a red flag. The other one, as I alluded to earlier, is overreach, to the extent that a company starts talking about systems, uses, content on systems and projects that have nothing to do with the company. Those are red flags. So I think those are the two big areas: poor definition and the scope of what they're looking at. If you can be precise and limited, then you're on your way to an AUP that I'm pretty comfortable signing.
All right. Evan, I want to give you the last word on this. And again, you know what? I think I'm going to make the marked up version that you made of this AUP. I'm going to make it available for chat room and for our listeners at the same link so that they can actually see the notes that you've made. Looking at this either as the employer or as the employee, what are the things that you need to make sure you cover? That as an employer, you need to make sure are in there, or as an employee, you need to make sure that you understand before you put your name to paper?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question, because I think it's a way to kind of tie up some of these issues that we've been talking about. I mean, there are a number of interests that the enterprise would have. I think the biggest one has to be information security and meeting privacy obligations, whether by trade, custom, or by statute or regulation. So you've got to make sure that you have the ability to stop the employee from doing things that compromise those ideals. Like I said, this kind of ties it up. So I think conversely, from the employee's standpoint, it would be making sure that the intellectual property interests in the content or the know-how or the materials generated in the course of the employer-employee relationship, that those are reasonable. There's no good business reason for an employer to be too grabby when it comes to this. There's, if it's content that doesn't relate to what the business does, why do they need it anyway? You only risk alienating or offending your talented employee if you're going to ask for that. And like I said, you run the risk of having portions of your contract declared void by a court if you, for example, violate the Illinois Employee Patent Act. I would also say that the copyright law, in as much as it it talks about work made for hire does a very good job of delineating what the respective rights between employer and employee ought to be without really monkeying with this too much. If it's within the scope of the employee's employment and, it's created on his or her, if it's created, on company time, then the employer is the author of that content. If it's something different, or if it's an independent contractor and the contract doesn't say otherwise, then the independent contractor owns it. So the law already provides a pretty good mechanism for ownership of works when it comes to copyright here. So just to summarize once again, the employer's biggest interest, among others, would be security and privacy. The employee's interest would likely be ownership of the resulting stuff that's created.
Resulting stuff. I like that. Let's leave it there with the resulting stuff. Well, you've done it. You have used up another hour with This Week in Enterprise Tech. Thank you very much for watching. Did you know that we actually do this show live? That's right. Every Monday at noon Pacific time, we're here and we're live. And we're talking with you in the chat room. If you go to live.twit.tv, you'll be able to find the live stream. And if you jump into irc.twit.tv, you'll be able to find our chat room, which is filled with some of the most brilliant people, some of the funniest trolls, and just an overall incredible community of temporary geeks who come together for the common good. Also, you can subscribe. You don't just have to download each episode by itself. You can go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet and find all the different ways that each episode of Twiet can be dropped into whatever device that you use. iPad? Sure. iPhone? Of course. Android device? You betcha. Zune? Yep, we've got your zombie Zune covered. Jump over to our page and find the way that works for you. If you want the audio version, you can download that for your drive to work. If you want a video version to cuddle up with later on, sure, let's do it. We want to get you Twiet in as many ways possible so that you can get all the Uber Geek goodness. Also, you can jump to the Twiet YouTube page. In fact, I insist you jump to the Twiet YouTube page because it's getting really lonely over there. We've got a brand new channel at youtube.com/Twiet, where you'll be able to find all of our new episodes. You'll be able to write comments that I will answer to. And in just a bit, we're going to be adding our Google Plus Hangouts so you can get Twiet more than once a week. Also, please follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. You'll be able to make comments about each episode, suggest topics for future episodes, and just find out what a day is like in the life of the digital Jesuit. Finally, I want to thank everyone who made this show possible, starting with our guest and our co-host. Curtis, what's going on at Enterprise Efficiency?
Well, we continue to look for CIOs and senior IT execs to tell their stories, and I'll ask the audience, if you have not been in touch with me and you are a CIO or senior IT executive, please give me a shout. I'd love to chat with you about what you're doing. Best way to do that is through my email account. That's franklin@enterpriseefficiency.com.
Over to you, Oliver. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I wish we could have you on more, even though you seem to shrink as every episode goes on. Oh, there you go. What's going on in your part of the world?
Well, sadly, I'm about 2.5 months behind on a review I was supposed to do for InfoWorld, combining Windows Server Essentials with Office 365. I don't know how I have to apologize to them for that. However, this show has given me a really great slant I can take on Office 365 and whether or not you should really trust your data in the cloud. So I think that's what I'm going to be working on. And yeah, if anybody wants to send me their opinions, it's OLRIS as in Sam, T as in Tom at live.com.
And from experience, I know that that will be filed directly into the garbage.
Oh, well, just you, buddy.
Just me. Last but not least, my Twit colleague, star of This Week in Law, Evan Brown. What's going on? What do you have coming up on the show? What should people know about you?
Oh, Padre, first of all, let me say thanks. It's been such an honor and a blessing to be on your show. Great time here. Yeah, over at Twill, Denise and I, we just kind of take it week by week. We have no trouble in finding new developments coming up. There's always crazy things coming down from the courts, companies making new decisions to implement new policies. So week after week, there's always just great content that we just kind of have to be there and wait for it to come to us and then talk about. And we usually bring in a couple of great guests week to week. So as far as me, I have just recently joined a new law firm. It's called Info Law Group. Go to infolawgroup.com and read about us. It's just a wonderful place. I'm having a great time working with some new colleagues. My focus is on technology and intellectual property. We are have some great. I have some great colleagues who are also very versed in data privacy, information security, promotions, branding, anything having to do with technology development or content development, licensing, enforcement, things like that. Take a look at infolawgroup.com. That's my new law firm. And follow me on Twitter at Internet Cases. And I'd love to connect with you all. It's been a real pleasure interacting with the Twiat community today. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being on. And special thanks to everyone back at the Brick House who makes this show possible. To Cranky Hippo, Brian, who is our TD for the day. To Karsten, who is my super producer. Next week, make sure you watch the video version because Chibert will be back and he promises to give us the up nostril shot. I'm Father Robert Balasaire. And remember, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep Twiat.